Thanks for that introduction, I think, Anita. Afternoon, everybody. It's great to be with you. Yesterday, I was in my office, and I was just beginning to turn my mind about what I would say today, and I was kind of putting off writing the speech, and I picked up the paper, and in it was an interesting letter signed by, I think I can see a few of you, a number of people who are in the audience today. It said this: "The NHS is at the most challenged time in its existence," which, I have to say, did make me sit up and take notice. And it went on: "Politicians better get their fingers out and give us some honest answers for once in their bloody lives." I paraphrase, but it was something like that. That's what I love about this conference. It really knows how to take the pressure off people and put you at your ease before you come and speak to it. So I will try not to disappoint you today and give you a few honest answers. As you know, though, I do have a very clear vision for health and care in the 21st century. And I want to say more about that today, more about how we get to what I call whole person care. I think what you will feel is that the devil will be in the detail, and how do we get from A to B? And that's something we all need to have a conversation about. But first, I want to say something different to start with, because yesterday actually I think was quite a revealing day in terms of what was happening here and what was happening down the road. As you were gathered here, you were hearing some pretty stark warnings about the perilous moment that we are in. You know, we were told that the NHS is at a defining moment. Well, while you were here, I was 200 miles away listening to the Queen's speech in Westminster, in which the words National Health Service did not appear, and in a Prime Minister's response later in the House of Commons, where there was a fleeting reeling off of a number of achievements on health, but no acknowledgement at all of the seriousness of the situation which was being described to you here. Now, whichever way you look at it, that's quite a disconnect, isn't it? And a dangerous one at that. The word in Westminster is that the government has ordered a period of silence on the NHS for the year up to the general election. But as you know, all that time, the NHS will be sliding ever closer to the edge of the cliff. The public need to know, don't they, the scale of the challenges that are before all of you right now as you sit around at the table making the decisions that you have to make. And that is why, even though there's no health bill, we have allocated a full day to health on Monday as part of the debate on the Queen's speech. We have to focus Parliament's mind on the seriousness of the situation that this conference is discussing. So I hope that shows you that the opposition is seized of the situation which you are in. We may be entering the pre-election phase, but I know that political platitudes, sound bites, point scoring will be of literally no use to you as you try to grapple with the situation you face. What you need is an honest appraisal, which I think is what the letter was asking us to do. Not tinkering or gimmicks, but solutions of scale that are equal to the enormity of what is coming at the system in which you work. So in that spirit, let me really start by cutting to the chase and taking head on the money question. In recent weeks, there's been growing talk of the need for another ring fencing or a new tax, an NHS tax, to help the NHS find a way through. Now, for a service that has been living for the last 5 years on a flat budget, and from within which a flat budget, it has had to pay for a large reorganisation which continues to rumble on, I can understand why a growing number of people are making that call. But I have to say to you today, I just don't see how it can possibly be the first response that we make in the public arena when we look at the enormity of what's before us. Now, you might be thinking, now why is he saying that? Let me just explain to you. Before I ask any of my constituents 15 or 20 miles down the road from here in Lee for more money to pay for the NHS, I have to be able to look them in the eye and assure them that we are squeezing every last drop out of what they are currently giving us for health and care. Now, can I do that today? The answer is no, I'm afraid I can't do that. Why? It's not that the NHS is inefficient. It is more that the 20th century model of care, of which we have in this country and of which the NHS is part, is now forcing a growing inefficiency on the NHS. For all of its great strengths, the NHS has always been a treatment model, overly focused on the hospital. I would put it to you that that weakness is now being severely exacerbated by severe cuts to social care, which in the last few years have seen support in the home withdrawn from around 250,000 vulnerable people. So, what does that mean? Well, it means for the want of spending a few preventative pounds in people's homes, on a grab rail, on a walk-in shower, or on home care of a decent standard, not these 15-minute flying visits, for the want of doing that, spending a modest amount of money in people's homes, we end up spending many thousands of pounds keeping people unnecessarily in acute hospital beds. And that has been growing and is increasing as we speak. Policy decisions to cut social care, general practice and mental health have placed unprecedented pressure on the most expensive end of the health and care system, the acute hospital. Indeed, it's been pushing people to the most expensive end of this system. And that pressure is becoming unsustainable. Hospital A&Es have now missed the government's A&E target for 45 weeks running. If A&E is the barometer of the whole health and care system, then surely it is sending us the clearest of warnings that severe storms are ahead if this situation is not urgently addressed. Yesterday's letter to the newspapers that you signed went on to say this, quote, "The services we commission and run are not designed to cope with the care needs of the 21st century, especially the large number of people with multiple long-term conditions and an increasingly ageing population." That analysis is surely right, and I think something on which we can all agree. But it follows from that analysis that until we correct the flaws in this system, in this 20th century model of care, we can't ask the public, can we, to pay even more into that system, because we've already admitted that we are not able to get the best for them out of what they're currently giving. And that is the crux of this, isn't it? That is where this comes down to. To put more money in now would be to prop up a 20th century medical model of care, which is increasingly offering the ever-increasing hospitalisation of older people as its answer to the ageing society. Well, that is no answer, is it? And simply calling for money might be a way of putting off the inevitable, remodelling how we care for people in the ageing society. Only when we've done that essential first stage will we know whether the system needs more money, and if so, how much does it need? And that is essential before we get to any such call. But this is where Parliament comes in, and this is where Parliament can help you. And I would also agree, this is where it needs to act decisively and quickly. We need to allow you to get on and change the way services are provided. And I know that will only be able to happen if, between us, we can create a political consensus around the change that's needed, around the NHS moving increasingly into social care, into the home, switching care from hospital to home. I am sure you've not found much in the political debate since the last election to cheer you. It's been a pretty acrimonious debate at times. But one bright spot is the extent to which the call for integration of health and care has become common ground, both in Parliament and also out in the real world. My argument is that this call for integration, it will only offer a proper solution if we embrace it fully, rather than in half measures, and think going forward of health and care as a single service. I hear a whisper that Norman Lamb might have said something to you earlier today, which shows that there is progress, that there is a growing understanding that integration is pretty much all or nothing. There's no point in dipping your toe. If you go for it, you unlock savings by embracing it fully. But this is the problem. because Norman's comments to you are actually at odds with what the government is now doing. Let me put my cards on the table. I am really worried that the Better Care Fund might get integration a bad name. It always felt to me like a rushed response, a cobbled together policy agenda responding to Labour's lead on this issue. But it's not just the timetable that's the problem. It is also the fact that it is based on the old notion of shunting funds from one side of the Berlin Wall to the other, from the NHS to local government, rather than embracing the notion of a truly single service. So as it stands, money will be passed from the NHS to local government, not to create additional services to keep people out of hospital, but probably to backfill cuts to social care that are being made right now in this financial year. And that, in turn, creates a big risk that the promised reduction in emergency admissions will never materialise, leaving the NHS in a much weakened position in 2015 than it might otherwise have been. 15-16 was always going to be a dangerous year. And if this proceeds without the necessary checks, the Better Care Fund could tip it over the edge. The implications of this are so serious for every community in England that these plans can't be signed off behind closed doors. So one of my reasons for calling Monday's debate is to have proper challenge of what the Cabinet Office is saying to the Department of Health and give Parliament a chance to say whether it thinks it is safe to proceed on the timetable the government has outlined. Now, you might then be sitting there thinking, all right then, fine, but what would you do? Now, that is a very fair question, and let me now move on to answer it. I would do something very different. I would do something very different if I was in post right now. I have a very different plan in mind to help the NHS migrate from today's 20th century service to the 21st century health and care system it needs to be. If I'm standing before you this time next year as Health Secretary, I know I will have a precious moment, a really, really precious moment, to build a sense of shared endeavour, to reset the NHS, and also in doing that, public expectations about it going forward. And I intend to use it to the full, but also very, very carefully too. Because I know it just doesn't have the capacity to be forced into any pet political projects that might distract it from the essential task of service reform and financial sustainability, those two sides of that same coin. If I were to do the old trick of getting through a general election and pulling a rabbit out of the hat and foisting a grand plan on an unsuspecting NHS, that would be to do an enormous disservice. I don't think that can ever, ever happen again as it happened after the last general election. This has got to be, not my agenda, Labour's agenda. Whatever we do has to be a shared agenda, your agenda too, embraced and owned as such. A 10-year journey where everybody says, right, this is the right direction and this is the right goal. That is why last year I established the Commission on Whole Person Care under the leadership of Sir John Oldham, who many of you will know. I asked him to try and build that sense of shared endeavour, to build some professional ownership of our agenda of full integration, and to show how we can get the service change we need without going through another structural reorganisation. I'm pleased to say that John has done just that, and I recommend his outstanding report to you. Truly a seminal report that doesn't go straight to the structures and talk about all of that jargon that we all like to talk about, but in fact does something very different for a report of this kind. Starts with the person, speaks in their language, and describes how we should aim to build services around individuals and families from where they want to be in their own home, surrounded by the people that they love. John's report gives an authoritative endorsement to the central call that we have made, that the time has come to reset the NHS in the 21st century as a service for the whole person that can deal with all of one person's needs. Not a medical or a treatment model, but a truly preventative service that can at last aspire to give all people a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being. That will only happen if we imagine a single service where the financial tide within it pulls towards the home and not the hospital, supporting people there. So I am talking about a journey towards full integration, towards a single service, towards a single budget, where we commission for one person and all of their physical, mental and social needs. And it's only by doing that, uniting the physical, mental and social, that we create the conditions for truly radical change. And what is that change? The full personalisation of care in a way that our current silo-based services will never be able to achieve. The world that we have at the moment of people going through a random, disconnected series of encounters with professionals where no individual within all of those professionals takes responsibility for the whole person and all of their needs, that will never deliver a truly personalised service. But that is what we can aspire to if we make the move towards full integration. Resetting the NHS in this way would, of course, be a major change. And if it is to happen, I think I would use that moment I get next year to repeat an exercise that happened last 66 years ago. And I think if I were to do this, we would all get real benefit from it. Back then, when the NHS was created, Nye Bevan set public expectations about his new NHS with a leaflet sent to every home in the land. Well, I think the time has come for a similar moment of honesty with the public, and also a similar moment of clarity about the NHS and what people should expect from it going forward. I think an exercise of this kind would be able to tell people clearly what to expect, how they should expect to see services changing, and also be honest with them about the difficult other decisions that would have to be made to make these changes possible. It could be of tremendous value to us all, couldn't it? Aligning public, professionals and politicians at the outset of this necessary journey, 10-year journey, to make the NHS 21st century ready. Yeah, I envisage it saying something like this, the leaflet that we might send to everybody's home that might explain to them how they may be cared for as they become more vulnerable. It's something like this. Going forward, you should expect to receive much more support in your home. The NHS will work to assemble one team to look after you, covering all the needs you have. We want to build a personal solution that works for you, for your family and your carers. Because if we get it right at the outset, at the very beginning, it's more likely to work for you and give you what you want and cost us all much less. We want you to have one point of contact for the coordination of your care. We know you are fed up with telling the same story to everyone who comes through the door. It's frustrating for you, but wasteful for us. To get the care you are entitled to, when and where you want it, you will have powerful new rights set out in the NHS Constitution, such as the right to a single point of contact for the coordination of all of your care, and a personalised care plan that you have signed off. But, and there is a big but, and this is where the honesty is needed from people like me, to make all of this happen, you must expect to see changes in your local NHS, and in particular at your local hospital. If we can do a better job of supporting you where you want to be, we won't need to carry out as much treatment in hospitals or have as many hospital beds. It is only by allowing the NHS to make this kind of change, to move from hospital to home, that we will all secure it for the rest of this century. I think you get the picture, don't you? I think you understand what I'm trying to say. And I hope you're beginning to see what power there could be in an exercise of this kind, repeating that exercise that was carried out at the start of the NHS. It would be a moment when we could properly set up the NHS for the next phase of its life, giving it time and space to evolve into the 21st century service that we all want it to be. And how in practice might that happen? What will be the levers that start to pull it in this direction? Well, for me, it's essential that the acute sector is given the stability and clear incentives to grow in this way, away from the hospital and towards the home. We won't be able to contract our way there through any qualified provider. That's why I do see the NHS as the preferred provider. And I want to see the DGH given time and space to reinvent itself as an integrated care provider, working from home to hospital and all the settings in between, covering the full spectrum of need, physical, mental, social, and building that notion of one team around the person. That process could be facilitated by the development of a whole person year of care budget or year of care tariff, for people living with multiple or ongoing needs. And that would, for the first time, put the financial incentive where it should be, keeping people at home rather than treating people in hospital. It would give the Acute Trust a much more stable financial platform with which to face the future and start to embrace very different ways of working and to ask its staff to embrace very different ways of working. But at least they would have the security that knowing that their organisation was the NHS preferred provider, so perhaps then they would be able to open their minds to that change. It would be a much more stable outlook than the activity-based tariff that goes up and down and doesn't give the acute sector the ability to plan with that certainty. And while the notion of hospitals changing might worry the public, it doesn't follow that all of the changes would have to be to the things they care about most. Indeed, I see a situation where the resources that are unlocked are in those general medical beds, not necessarily from the A&E and maternity. It's unlocking those resources that keep an ever-increasing number of older people unnecessarily housed in hospital. The Future Hospital exercise led by the Royal College of Physicians offers, in my mind, a blueprint to guide how this process might take place. Its call for professionals to open their minds to new ways of working is, of course, absolutely essential to this vision. The time has come to move on from some of the old divides and some of the old loyalties that hold us back today. The GP versus the hospital, or primary versus secondary care, mental health versus physical health, council versus NHS. We've been living for too long in a world where if one of those wins, it automatically means the other one loses. Well, that can't carry on like that anymore, can it? That isn't going to serve the public. Future Hospital is surely right to say that going forward, loyalty should be not to organisations, buildings or professions, but to the care of the local population. There are, of course, implications here for professional practice and medical training. After decades of focus on specialisation, the time has come for a new emphasis on generalist care, on generalism. And I see the need for a new generation of generalist doctors and physicians working in our communities, not pigeonholed as a primary care generalist or a hospital generalist, but working across the boundaries. And yes, that might mean being open about changes to independent contractor status for GPs. This also points to a clearer separation in the system between specialist and generalist care, with the DGH refocused in the way that I describe, but not shying away then from saying that we should centralise specialist care for people in life-threatening situations. It also points to an NHS working to lift up standards in social care, creating the notion of a unified workforce between the two, and ending this terrible culture we have today, where staff employed in care are often on 0 hours contracts, are dishing out care in 15-minute visits when there's barely enough time to make a cup of tea, let alone have a conversation. And in fact, are not even paid the minimum wage because they don't get the travel time between their 15-minute visits. I put it to everybody here, how will we ever get the standards of care we want for our own parents, or indeed anybody's parents, from a malnourished minimum wage social care system like that? We won't, will we? How will we ever get what the 21st care system we want if the message we send to people who work within that system is that looking after someone else's parents is the lowest calling that they can answer, lower than McDonald's because it isn't even the minimum wage? Well, we won't get that system that we want, will it? We have to use the strength there is in NHS workforce and planning to lift up social care from the position it finds itself in today. And if all of this is to happen, then I would say we have to give the biggest of green lights to the NHS and its organisations that they have full permission to collaborate, to integrate, to merge without the nonsense of competition lawyers looking over their shoulder. Such is the urgency of this need to change. We should be removing barriers to service change, not erecting them. But I believe that is precisely what the competition regime of the Health and Social Care Act 2012 has done. That is why it has got to go, and it will, in the first Queen's speech of the next Labour government. I am clear that the market is not the answer to 21st century care. The future demands integration. Competition delivers fragmentation, complexity, and greater cost. I will build my 21st century health and care system on the clear principles, the twin pillars of collaboration before competition, people before profits. In conclusion, I hope this is a vision you can share too. It is designed to be practical, achievable, based on the evidence. It is the product of careful thought and reflection from my own time in government. It is intended to go with the grain, with what you are already trying to achieve in your communities. But finally, it is also intended to give real hope to a demoralised service, that we can safeguard the future of this service that we all hold so dear. Thank you very much indeed for listening. Yes, of course.
Time is unfortunately our enemy this afternoon, because I know a lot of you have plenaries to get to and breakout sessions, but we have got time for 2 questions. Could you please put your hand up very clearly, let the paddle people come to you. Just while we're waiting, if you can find people with the paddles. And I've got a question for you. It's 10% levy on value of estates after death. You talked about it quite a lot last year. Is the death tax dead?
Paying differently for social care is not dead, no. If you wanted to take what I was saying just now and really say, well, how do you develop the most ambitious version of it? I think it points to paying for social care in the same way that we pay for the NHS, i.e. everybody contributes, but then everybody's covered for all of the needs that they have. Now, we put forward that as an idea towards at the end of the last election, and we're currently at the point now where we're looking at all of those things again to say, well, we're not at the point yet where we're saying, this is the way we're going to do it.
Because when a politician says we're looking at all options, that means this thing has been hung, drawn and quartered, really.
Well, do you know, the National Care Service, which that supported, is something I think that has a great deal of support from people. You know, social care today...
So are you for it and is Ed Balls against it? And I'm trying to get to this because you were passionate about this.
I put it forward at the last election, so it's obvious I've got a good deal of support.
But is it something that there is no appetite within your party to put something forward like this because it would be politically difficult to push through?
Well, we did put it forward before the last election, didn't we? And the opposition then, now the government, did try to kind of, scare people about it with posters with gravestones on. But I think the public are way beyond it.
So it'll be in your manifesto?
Well, no, I'm not saying that because I can give you my personal view, but the party hasn't decided yet. We'll do that in the summer. Let me just finish though, Anita, because I think it's just a final point to say. Social care and paying for it in this century is as unfair as pre-NHS medical fees, in my view. The most vulnerable amongst us face the prospect of being wiped out financially by their vulnerability. Now, for the party of which I'm a member, how can we, of all people, accept that? And I think in the end, we will, as a society, have to come up with a solution that says, if you are unfortunate enough to have Alzheimer's, to have Parkinson's, together, collectively, we will support you and we will not let you be ruined financially by that condition.
I'm only cutting you short because that clock there is going to turn red and get angry. Has anyone got a question there? Is that somebody... If you've got a question and somebody with a paddle has given out a microphone, wave. Otherwise, I get to ask another one. Yes? If you can hurry, that would be brilliant. And if you can keep your question short, because I think the trap door might open actually if we run out of time. Who is it who had a question? There we are, the gentleman there. Thank you very much indeed.
Andy, Gorabangi, I'm chair and clinical leader, Chorley in South Ribble, so not so far from yourself. Yep. In the first year of CCGs, we've actually essentially bought a local economy made up of numerous providers and commissioners into what is now a functioning health economy. Yep. We've brought down A&E referrals, A&E attendances by about 10%, referral rates down by 3%, RTTs on target. We're pooling budgets wherever it's necessary. We're working to reform primary care.
Could you just come to the question? Sorry, we are running out of time.
So my question is this about a future reform, and is this going to put what we're doing at jeopardy?
No, it's about giving you the biggest of green lights to get on and do more of it. I think, as I was saying at the end of my speech, some of what is in the Health and Social Care Act is a kind of barrier to that kind of change, building that sense of one team around the person, one community, where you break down the barriers between the different organisations and you really do build a sense that everybody's pulling in the same direction. So the change I'm outlining here is about saying, let's get on and do that. The big thing that politics has always got wrong is when it thinks that when you have a new policy, you must have new organisations, you know, new PCTs or whatever. I will work with the organisations I inherit, health and wellbeing boards in particular. I will just simply give them a new job to do, and the new job will be whole person care. Build services out from the home, around the individual, and move us towards a truly preventative health and care system.
Andy, you see that flashing red light? It means we are out of time, but thank you all very much indeed for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.